Okay.
Right. Thank you. So again, our goal is to end at about 8:30, then we'll come back in out of breakouts, and we'll spend about 10 minutes to then have each of the groups talk a little bit about their grading scale, I guess is probably the best thing to call it, and then effort rubrics. And so we look forward to seeing kind of what you guys do. So just some quick reminders that over the last couple of months, so February 10th and then March 10th, we've met for our Wednesday collaborations. And, some of the prevailing themes have been, we really have appreciated resilience on the part of all of our students. And but we've been specifically talking about students with IEPs. And so, a theme has, again, been that we recognize the resilience, but we also like to look at that, where's the effort and what are students doing? And that's where we're more likely to offer that grace. So we're really wanting to look at how do we increase students' efficacy around these areas? And then also, what does that look like for us? And so it was really clear that we needed a rubric, and that's kind of where we've landed today. We looked at grades, just like a graph and a line graph, and we looked at just our percentages. And so we did have a couple questions and I wanted to clarify. So I just wanted to remind you again that, the gray color was like miscellaneous, and in the one that we looked at in March, they're also included the dashes. In other words, like there's no grade information. And sometimes with PACs, teachers don't go in and put the grade in until like the day before they're due. And so that information was actually included in that bar graph. And I was glad I learned that, because the second graph that I did for trimester 3, I took out those dashes, because if we're looking at percentages of grades, then having no information kind of skews that data. So now we are we're smarter about that, and we can look at it a little bit more, like just more purely, I guess. Then remember that the percentages are just the number of a specific letter grade out of total grades. And if you're in the slide deck, you can always come back to this key. So we looked at this particular one and we talked about, like, what do you see and what do you wonder? And so one of the things that came out of the gray conversation was that we talked about, like, what were some of the things, like, oh, this, track kids get pass or fail. Well, I called a couple of schools that have special education programs, and a lot of those students get letter grades, so that they really aren't on a pass and fail. The other piece was these gray part of the bar graph, they actually included just like the no grade information, the dashes. So I went ahead and just pulled trimester 3, and I just did that as of April 1st. And you can see that the gray numbers are smaller. And part of that, again, is that people probably haven't put in a lot of PAT grades. Then I also took out like no grade information, so where those dashes are. So this is just an update of kind of where we were as of April 1st. And again, you can go back to this slide if you would like. And we'll continue to just monitor this and talk about what do we see and what do we wonder. But definitely this is something that we want to be able to pursue. So SIP met on April 1st, and these are some of the key points that we came up with that we'd like to sort of share with you, and really is informing what we're doing today. So, basically, if students know the rules of the game ahead of time and they're reminded of these, then it will probably increase their efficacy. And rules of the games, obviously, just, when students know expectations, like whether it's in the form of rubrics or, clear instructions, et cetera, then students kind of know what they need to perform, kind of like lift their performance too. One of the questions that came out of SIP was that, could we use this with all students? And we landed on the realization that for today's purposes, it's really better to look at with our lens towards students with an IEP, because that just will narrow our focus and might make it a little bit easier to really hone in. But we did see there being some benefit to students with 504s, students who we know that they have, some sort of a, situation with their family. And so we thought, sure, this is probably a good place to go in the future. We said we wanted at least 20 minutes. That's why I'm talking really fast and trying to whiz through these, because I want to give you as much time. And then the other wondering is just, with these rubrics, like both the effort plus the grade scale, do they work independently or are they dependent? And I think that's a good conversation for you to have when you get into your breakouts. And then lastly, just thinking about the audience. I mean, partly the audience is for teachers, right? So that we're looking at, I wonder, do I need to remind the student about, effort, so that then, we're working in more of a partnership and then providing them with those grading accommodations. And then, so I think it's sometimes they would work independently and sometimes they would work dependently, and that would just be something that we would want to discuss. All right, so you are going to get into breakouts, and this is similar to what we did in March, which is if you are in groups 1, 3, 5, and 7, then you're going to look at the effort rubric. Now you will see that some of the work has been done because of March, some of that got done, so there is some information in there. We're going to randomly put you in this group. So you might be working on something different than you did back in March, which is, both a good and a bad thing, but we're going to go with random. And if you are in an even group, the grading accommodation, then you're going to be in, groups 2 and 4. You're going to look at the beginning, same with 1 and 3. You'll start at the top or, at the beginning, and then the latter numbers, you're going to start at the end. That way you sort of meet in the middle by the end of your breakout. This time, the recorder is the person who has the shortest hair, and then the reporter is the tallest person in your group, okay? So let's go ahead and just talk very quickly. If you open up the slides and you don't have them in present mode, you will notice that at the very bottom, you will see, hang on, let me just go to that. At the very bottom, there's a link. So that link has a lot of resources. So there are some sample rubrics from other districts. There are some sample grading scales from other districts. So, and then there's also a sample that Andre and Ali created. So feel free to pull some of that, copy and paste, adapt as you would like, but that information is a resource for you. And it's also linked on the grading scale one as well. So thank you to Andre and Ali for providing that resource to us. And Nate, at this time, I think we're ready to go into breakout rooms unless there are questions. Does anybody have any clarifying questions? That was 10 minutes, by the way. So thank you for taking all of that in quickly.
Okay, without questions, then we'll open up the breakout rooms in Hop 2.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so now that we're back, thank you. Gosh, it's really exciting to see a lot of cursors in there and a lot of thinking. So group one is Ethan. And one of the things we talked about was that maybe we're just going to look at that first column and talk about our thinking around that. And we were, basically just refining because that was pretty complete. So thank you for the work that we did on March. And then thank you for today. All right, Ethan, take it away.
Yeah. So if you're looking at class participation, we said at number 4, you're in class asking questions, engaging in discussions / the chat for virtual learners, and you do all your work consistently. The main thing that we wanted to focus on this is that not every student is capable of turning on their cameras in virtual learning. So we want to make sure that there's provisions made for those so that we don't dock kids for not being there or not participating just because their camera isn't on. So number 3 is the same thing, but they are just engaged and have work done most of the time. And moving down into low effort, scrolled a little bit too far. The main verbiage here is that they need to be prompted to participate in class and that they have to be reminded of where they are or have questions repeated. And then for 1, they're in attendance, but if they're virtual learners, there's no evidence of being present and they aren't initiating work even when prompted. Another thing that we brought up is that number 2 would kind of be where most students would be if we were in just a solely in-person environment. But being that we have our virtual learners to also contend with, that we need to kind of change where our standards are just to make sure that students are participating and are present in class. I think that's all I have. If anyone has anything else to add.
So any questions or thoughts? And feel free, even if you were in the grade accommodation group, you're certainly welcome to add something or change some verbiage. All right.
Could I jump in real quickly?
Yes, please.
I'd be nervous if I got really engrossed in someone's point and then I forgot what the question was. And I would be a little scared with the language here of having to have a question repeated. I don't know, I'm thinking about that student who's like, oh gosh, I don't want to ask just because now I'm going to be instantly down in the low effort zone, even though I'm kind of engaged in this. So just a tweak on that somehow. I don't know exactly what it would be though.
What do you think, people?
Yeah,
I agree with Matt. I mean, that
Mhm.
came to my mind as well, because I'm the kind of person who is a processor, and sometimes it buys you some extra think time to have the question repeated too. So maybe we could add question or add content, have the content of what the discussion was repeated instead of just a question or the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point, Matt. And we don't want students to then be afraid to ask questions because we want them to ask those questions. So maybe I need to have the content. If you have no idea what we're talking about, then that's an issue. But if you just were like, oh, what did you say again one more time? I appreciate that.
Yeah. So what if we just took out that verbiage? Just have to be reminded of where we are. To me, that's you're lost, you're not paying attention. And then just leave it at that. What do you
I
think?
appreciate having the word prompted in there because I feel like, I don't know. I think that is a good verbiage is what I should say, and then have a period at the end of my sentence.
Okay. But and then now Laura, so the prompted part was earlier. You're saying that that's okay. Are we in agreement that we want to take off the question so that we don't make kids think they can't ask questions? We actually want them to participate and ask clarifying questions.
Could we though leave some of it to teacher discretion on what type of question? Because to me, it's different when a kid asks me, could you repeat the question I just asked? Because they're thinking about it. Then the kid at the end of it who goes, what are we doing? You know.
So I think the thing we're trying to address here is actually paying attention, not so much
Mhm.
questions.
Yeah.
So maybe you might want to put something as being present. We talk about being present, which means you're mindful of what's going on in the classroom. That might be something that's what I get out of what we're trying to gauge here.
So do we want something like this then? Because I'm not paying attention. So that it's clearer or more, or do we want fewer words and then the teacher discretion enters into it?
I personally think there's power in fewer, clearer words, and then teachers can clarify as needed, kind of in. And Cheryl asked this, is this for self-reflection or teacher input to student? I think it's for both, and having fewer words means that it's easier for students to kind of grasp that big idea. And then in conversation with teacher, you can talk more about what does that look like to need reminders or to be prompted to participate.
I think that's also important, Nate, because if we're going to present this to our students, aside from the classes in our special education time, to kind of, get them ready for that participation, to get them to meet these standards that we're trying to come up with right now. I think the fewer words, the less, we want to be specific, yes, but I think the, really concise and clear to the point, I think is best with this situation.
Okay. All right. Any last thoughts on here? And we'll probably take this through our SIP team at our next meeting and then just fine grain it, get it ready, put it onto a Google Doc, et cetera. So independent work completion.
There was one other question from
Yeah,
Hannah.
you bet.
I think that this applies to a lot of these categories too. Hannah, if you want to speak more to it, wondering about most of the time for high effort, if you want to speak to that and what you're wondering about there with most of
I guess
the time.
it goes to my second comment more, which is I'm curious about using high effort and low effort and having this like very polarized rubric and not having something that mimics the grade rubric, which has like proficient effort in it. And I just feel like we send the wrong message sometimes by calling things high effort when they're really just moderate or acceptable effort. And I just think that there's a difference between that. And I would really like us to start, I just think it's important for us to start thinking about that with all of our student population, that there is an exceeding and there is a meeting, and they're not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should start maybe with an acceptable level of effort. What does acceptable effort look like? And then go above that and say, okay, here is going above and beyond. That's high effort. And then here's going below, and here's what low effort would look like. So either adding something in the middle or actually literally taking one away and making a 3-tiered system, I think makes more sense.
So I think what I'm hearing you say though is we want to get rid of this verbiage. Like we don't want there to be the words high or low for sure, right? Is that what you're saying, Hannah? And then
I mean, I'm okay with high and low. I mean, I think it would probably be better if we had some consistency in the language. So whether we're using exceeds or exemplary or proficient or emerging, I mean, I think that would be important. But what I'm really saying, what you're typing in there, Heidi, is what I'm really saying, which is, could we show more levels of growth for students? Because I think I don't think it's black or white. I don't think it's either your effort is amazing and high or your effort is super, super low. I mean, I think that there's like a range.
Maybe that number 2 is acceptable, or
I like, Kayla said emerging.
I know, I just put that in there just being silly, but
Yeah.
I agree. Emerging is a really good.
I think merging's perfect.
And then how about, right, the next one is maybe improvement needed or something, or growth?
Growth needed, or what do we call the bottom of our general rubric? Needs improvement. There's a good one.
I think I like needs improvement or something along those lines, because it tells kids, you know, it gives them a direction rather than just like, oh, I'm low, you know.
Yeah, better than just saying F or not acceptable or something like that. It gives them, it's a growth mindset.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, good.
What
All
is
right.
not getting there?
Let's go with our group number 3, independent work. And we can always come back as you're thinking. You can always go back to class participation and keep, just keep it revolving.
All right, well, I guess I am the tallest in group number 3. But first thing as we started going through that, one of the first things we looked at was just the verbiage, the word homework. And Scott came up with independent work, which is a little bit broader, I think, as far as the meaning, and covers a little more bases. So we started with this idea of changing homework to independent work. We also wanted to stay away from the idea of percentages, actual numbers. So we use terms like all, most, etc. And then Carol put in the idea to the best of my ability, or to the best of their ability. Again, that's a nice way to kind of cover the accommodations also. So you can talk about, and we obviously put it into the 4 levels. Obviously we can read that. So that was our cut at it. I'm not sure exactly where the advocate for self-use tools teacher, that came in from somewhere else. So if somebody wants to address that.
Can we hear from that group that added in that advocate for self? Give your
Yeah, that was our group 7.
Oh.
We just thought that part of this whole thing is students, and it's what we tell students a lot in IEP meetings, is for them to advocate for themselves, to really think through if they're doing independent work, instead of just like emailing your teacher, which we want you to do if you're struggling. What are the steps that my teacher has taught me? Like, what instructions do I need to read? What Schoology page do I need to visit? What are the bullet points of steps that need to be gone through to be successful? Do I need, so that's what we were thinking.
I think,
and
sorry.
Go ahead.
Irene. Oh, sorry, Eileen. We had also just kind of talked about if maybe when we do roll this out, if there could be some kind of checklist that students would get that just says with boxes, this is what you should do for, I don't know, we were thinking a checkbox, did you read the directions the second time? Did you check your Schoology page? Did you ask if you needed accommodations? Just like a very visual reminder for them. And we didn't want to make it, we know we want to keep the rubric simple, so we just didn't know where to put that in.
What do you think, guys?
I like that idea.
Basically try and make this a little bit more kid-friendly language. I know that we have the I statements, but I'm thinking for a 6th grader who is essentially still a 5th grader in the fall coming in, they might need something more direct.
Yeah. And we were thinking too about those kids who they sit down and try to do their homework and they thought they understood it in class, but then they realize, oh, I have no idea. And instead of just instantly going to email their teacher, they've got that intermediary step to be able to say, well, hold on, what are my strategies again? Where's that checklist? Did I actually read the instructions? Did I really look at this? And so it gives them a time to grow their understanding or realize what their question is or what they don't get.
Mm-hmm. So SIP team, is that something that we want to work on next month? Like like gleaning from this particular rubric and then devising a checklist that we can share with our whole staff and get input. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we already kind of have a pseudo checklist that I use already with kids that I can show at our SIP meeting and show you ahead of time, Heidi. But definitely all of us working on it. I mean, these are such good ideas to help with the our kids. So
Well,
teacher,
cool.
thank you, Andre.
I was going to say, I'm pretty confident I can rise to the level of a sixth grader and write some stuff. So,
I love that confidence. Thank you.
yeah.
All right, so group 7, maybe?
But one other clarifying question there, maybe this got addressed. Dave was asking in the chat, what does on time mean if a student also has an accommodation or modification for extended time? Would that just be understood that their on time can look different for students based on their different accommodations and modifications?
Yeah, when we put those words in there, we just wanted to leave, we didn't want to get incredibly specific, simply because it's going to be different for the different kids, and how, again, and you leave it up to teacher discretion, which again, we all decide what is on time. I mean, I know I have classes right now where there's kids that, we know what is going on at their home life, etc. I'm just glad they get it in, and I mark it as on time. It's fine. So leave it up to that teacher discretion.
And Nate, I think also most of our teachers, from what I've gathered so far, is we do like the idea of the self-advocacy part about asking for an extension at least, or emailing the need for an extension rather than just assuming, I can turn it in whenever. So when we write that accommodation, Allie and I can actually put in there, through self-advocation or self-advocate, in order to get an extension, or, something to that effect. So that way we're clarifying it in the IEP as well. So that way parents and kids know, you have to ask, you have to do some sort of, negotiate, well, maybe not negotiation, but some kind of, way to ask for that extension and work with the teacher.
Sure. So what do you think about adding that verbiage then? So completed on time or agreed upon date.
I think, again, less words is good there if we just know that on time can be a different time frame for different students based on their needs. That helps keep it in shorter, clearer language.
And that self-advocacy piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
This might also be, I realize, teacher discretion, but I was also thinking, I have students who, they do eventually get all their work in, but it's late. So where do they end up on this scale? I mean, they do every assignment, so is that a 4, but they don't get it in on time?
We have that down. I guess it's in emerging now. I've turned in less than half of independent work, and not to the best of my ability, and not on time. I imagine we could put and or in there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh, because the way I was reading that was
the keyword was sporadic, I think.
I read the number 2, sorry, as they've only turned in half their work. So.
Okay. All right. So we added the and or. Thank you. Anything else with independent work?
I think just acknowledging, not with that specific category, but Cheryl's question about how does this get used? I think that's a broader question that we can come back to as we get the actual language fine-tuned for how do we implement it going forward.
Yeah, that's a great question, Cheryl. And I think it's probably on all of our minds, right? Like, when do we implement this? And I guess I think from like our previous conversations from the last 2 months, it seemed like people, our staff they want to see the effort from students, and they kind of see that as being a little bit kind of dependent on whether or not you're giving grace. And I think that, we still need to grapple with that part of it and figure out what does that look like. But definitely it's a conversation that we haven't had yet that we need to get really clear. Teacher contact, that probably would be like group 7, 5 or 7 actually. Anybody in 5 or 7 want to talk about teacher contact?
We were group 7. We focused on the independent work completion mainly.
Okay.
We did go to this link down below in the resources, sample rubrics and grading scales, and thought that might be neat to modify it for like a self-reflection for students. But we did talk, we did one note that we talked about that I think was kind of cool. Like in years past, we focused so much on, you know, standards and if they're there as far as the content and learning goals. And it's neat that we're adding in effort, because it's such a life skill, persistence and effort. And, you know, it's nice that it's being recognized and as part of like the whole student.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Matt. So I know group 1 talked about teacher contact. So do we want to come back to group 1? So maybe the other groups just didn't get to that column that was kind of over toward the second half of the page. That's probably the case. So group 1, do we want to just share just a little bit of some of the thinking?
Yeah, sure. So we did a sliding scale on how much the students contact their teachers based on if they have any questions about anything, or if they turn in an assignment after the due date, just as a notification. And then also, you can see number 4, I attend virtual tutorial sessions and or office hours when needed. And see number 3, there's I speak to my teachers in person the next day when I have a question, or submit an assignment late, or email them a day or so later. And then 2, I contact my teachers a week or more after I have a question or submit an assignment. And 1 is I do not ask. And so at the NA at the top, the 4+, I do not need to contact my teacher outside of the class because I do not have any questions and I do not have any missing or late assignments. I'm seeing the questions in the chat, and that is a very good point. Our reasoning with that is that we don't want to penalize students who, you know, haven't turned in anything late or don't have any questions about anything. But that is something we definitely need to consider, dissuading students. But
I think it should be, sorry, Ethan, I think it should be not a 4+, just an NA. Like, I don't think this is like an extra thing to attain to, like, oh, if you don't ask questions, good job. I think it's if the student didn't have any questions or they didn't turn in any late work, that they're not getting like a 2 or a 1 because they didn't email us questions. They didn't tell us, oh, I turned in a late assignment. So I think it's just like a not applicable. Like, you're not going to be, knocked down if you didn't email questions because you asked them in class, maybe in person, or, you know, so I think that's more the.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew. I think in that case, we would see likely a 4 in class participation, independent work completion.
Exactly.
So you don't need to use that column for.
Yeah. And we were talking about like they're asking the questions there in class, or so it's kind of just like a not applicable. They didn't email me. So, yeah. So I don't think there should be a score associated with that one.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else with that? And then we've got one of our groups worked on that communication and social interaction. So thank you for thinking of that category, that one. For those of you who were not part of this particular task, there was a question mark, and then we were just leaving it open-ended so that people could choose if there was a category that we hadn't considered. And so this is great. So what group worked on that one, please?
That was group 5. When we started this, we saw that question mark. And so we started coming up with some things in that lower effort. We decided that we wanted to focus on that communication and social interaction as that life skill to really help that student grow as a whole person. And so we really focused on the 2 and the 1 about being able to communicate appropriately with teachers and with peers, and what that looks like between a 2 and a 1, where some of that verbal prompting is needed. We also took a look a lot at the Arlington rubric and kind of what they did, not only in academics, but also in whole person growth. And so I thought it was important that we include something about communication and that social interaction.
All right, what do you think, people?
Just to add to that as well, I think we have some overlapping kind of categories on the top there, just, just from an observation standpoint. But I mean, I think that, once we combine everything and refine it, I think it'll come out to like a pretty nice little document. So I don't know if there should be, something where, teacher contact and communication and social interaction kind of get melded together, and then maybe a different column, be formed maybe for, academic standard or knowledge or something like that. But, it seems to me like we're kind of talking about the same thing there, the teacher contact. And but again, I think, we looked at that, the demos, the Arlington School District one, and then the one in Springfield, Massachusetts. And, we would take this 4, 3, 2, 1, add it up, and it would, correspond to a chart that would be a percentage eventually. And at my last school district, we actually had a committee that was district wide that provided the grading guidance for all of the district. And I think that, it was the kind of thing where even in Power School, it would be able to you could put in a number and it would transfer automatically into a percentage grade. That would take some tech stuff, but it would make it easier for teachers in general.
All right, good thing to consider. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. We're at 8:39. We have time, and we want to get this fleshed out. So let's hear from the groups that had the grading accommodation. And so, wow, there's a lot of information here to kind of take into account. So do we want to start out with group number 8, please? We'll work backward.
Of course, you're going to work backwards, because what my comment was going to be is we agree with everything that's already been said. But as you can see, you look at this, and there's a lot of information on there, and I actually look at the comment from Cheryl there. This is very confusing. Don't we do this already? And I think that this is a lot of stuff that we already do. This is almost like a list of best practices. I look at this and I think every time every time a student earns a D or an F in my class, I immediately start thinking about what we just did, that previous slide, and how is the student's effort compared to what they've produced. And if the effort looks to be high, I can't remember the word that we actually used, but the production is low, then there's absolutely room to grow. And that's regardless of whether the student is on an IEP or not. So you can look at that. Our group was, excuse me, our group, there was some conversation about whether missing work ends up being marked at 50% or a 0%. And so that was part of it. So I think that's about all. Most of the writing on there was from other groups. Dave, Ashley, and I watched them and said, yes, we agree with that. So maybe another group should talk.
All right. Well, I would like to address, Cheryl's question, like, don't we already do this? I think what's come out of our last 2 months conversations is that they want something that's a little bit more informative. I think that what we heard from a lot of our staff is that it's so open-ended. They don't know really what does a grading accommodation look like. And if you go to the link, I mean, there's literally a scale, like 60% a student with a grading accommodation, they're earning, I don't know, I'm just saying off the top of my head, like 45%. So I think it's a little more concrete than maybe what's written here. So would love to hear from our other groups, and let's see what your thinking is.
So Heidi, I don't mean to take too much time, but that was the scale that I was talking about that matches with the previous rubric that we were all looking at. So in other words, if you got a 20 points, that was a 97% to 100%. But if you got like a 14 or a 12 on that previous rubric that would match up on that scale as being a 65% or whatever it is that we decide on those scales. And that's how the Texas and the Massachusetts and even in Los Angeles County did their, we did that there. So I think that what this looks like, and I don't want to, it looks kind of like what we do already, like what they were kind of, I think a couple of people were saying, and trying to, it's not as clearly defined as, like you were saying, I think it could be. But, if kids are on a modified grading plan, then that would be, we use that rubric rather than the standard percentages, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, so let's just go to that link. I'm just going to open that up for a second. Actually, I think I have it open. So let's see. Yeah, so you can see, like this is just like the percentages as Andre was discussing. And then
way down on the bottom, if you look on, there you go.
Mhm.
That's how the Arlington kind of did it, and the Massachusetts. So in other words, like if they got, if you were going to go out of a 20-point scale, again, this one, it went up to 32 as well, because, they did 24, but for ours, it looks like it's going to be a 20-point scale. And then we would just have to decide, if you get an 18 to a 20, you get an A. If you get, a 12 to, a 14 or whatever to a, to 17, you get a, whatever it might be. So, I think, that's the way I've always looked at those rubrics, is converting them into a grade. And as I was saying, if we can get tech involved, there's a way to set the algorithm in PowerSchool where a teacher can just say modified grading plan, and then just put in a number, and it converts right into that percentage. And that way, nobody has to like be looking at some scale and going back and forth and all that kind of thing.
So I have a question. In general, the way I've understood it and always dealt with special education is that you have one or the other, generally not both. You either have accommodations, which then allow you to try to meet the standard of the normal student, or you have grade modifications, which means you may have a few accommodations, but you generally don't have both things. And so I think that was one of the things we were struggling with. We were group number 4, is that this, first of all, people had a lot of different expectations or a lot of different ideas. We felt that A's are exemplary. They represent this top 10% if you're looking at a bell curve, and that if you get a C, you're meeting standard, where some people thought that a C meant approaching standard. And we kind of wondered just how much of this is tied to, why is a C bad? Why is getting a C viewed as such a bad thing? And maybe not even in a school, as a teachers, but as a society. And that is where some of this is coming from, is that all of a sudden, because you get a C, you're not good enough. When I see a kid who gets 3 out of 4 as being meeting standard. You're doing a great job. And why is that message not our focus? Why I feel like too much of this is all about, I have to have an A or I didn't do a good job. I have kids on math tests, they get a 78%, they want to do a retake. And I'm like, wait, you got a 78%, you did awesome. You did a great job. And these aren't sped kids, these are normal kids. I'm like, you did great. And they're like, well, my mom and dad are mad. And I'm like, what are you, there's this societal thing that we need to help break, I think, in terms of grades and in terms of what they mean in terms of a person. An A, B, or C is not who you are. It's just a piece of data. It's just what happened this day. And we need to disattach emotion to it. The other thing that we talked about in group 4 a lot is, like kind of what Andre said, is we feel like, we're trying to build this thing, but we want just direction. If we don't want kids on SPED to fail, that's fine. We're fine with that. We're cool. Just tell us that and they'll pass. If we want to do some great standard-based grading system where every missing assignment is a 50%, and fine, we may not agree with it, but just tell us and we'll just do it. We feel like we're getting pulled in all these different directions and having to fight through this when we feel like there could be an easier way. That's what my group came out of it with. They do a good job, group 4.
Can we hear from the other two? Thank you. Thanks, group 4. Appreciate that. That's a helpful perspective. Let's hear from, I think maybe we didn't hear from 2 and 6.
Heidi, did you just say that was an awful perspective or an
Why
awesome?
would I ever say that? I would never say that.
I know,
awful.
I couldn't hear you for sure. I just wanted clarification.
Yeah, no, it's a helpful.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you.
All right, 2 or 6?
I'm not sure if my internet's working very well. So if I start to lag, just like cut me off. I was in group 6 and we talked about a variety of things, as you can tell by this, notes out on the thing, but we had some great conversations and mostly stuff that's already been said. But one of the things that I did want to point out was where we wrote other needed accommodations. And at the beginning of the meeting, we said, let's look at this in the lens of IEP 504, but knowing that it could definitely go out to all. And so we talked about that other needed accommodations. So that would be for like temporary, if a student is dealing with a temporary hardship. And we like, and I think Cheryl or somebody asked even last week, like that, when do we use this? Who does it apply to? And one thing we talked about, if we do know, and I mean, we already at school is if a student is having a hard time, they go to, is my okay? I've never had issues. They go to their counselor and the counselor can send out like that email, like students struggling. And that's when we maybe switch over to that effort rubric at that point.
All right, thank you, Kelly.
I was a part of
helpful.
I was a part of group 6 as well, and I just kind of wanted to kind of build off of what Kelly was saying, because we were also, I think Kathy actually just put it in the chat, and I was just going to say that Canfield, talking about IEP students. Basically, we really liked the Arlington rubric, and if you guys go into that link, it has like 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is like independent, but with their accommodations. And we like the idea of kind of having that 1, 2, 3, 4 take the place of like the letter grade. And so where students with IEPs wouldn't get an F unless they are not putting in any effort, it's basically just like 0 assignments turned in, 0 effort. So that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 would be replaced by like D, C, B, and then A. And we really like the verbiage in that one, the Arlington rubric. And yeah, I think I was going to say something else, but now I just lost my train of thought. But yes, I think I got distracted by the chat. But that was kind of where we were thinking. And then we also kind of going back to what Mike was saying about the B and C, because I think all of our like even groups, when we were talking about this, right, in is a B meeting standard or is a C meeting standard? I was under the impression that maybe a C was meeting standard. And so that's kind of where my train of thought was going. But so with students with IEPs, so both, but like, where is the differentiation with that? So I think, maybe we can brainstorm specifics with students with IEPs while we're building this rubric.
All right. Well, and when I looked at that scale that, that Andre, that you had shared, it seems so prescriptive, which is kind of why I thought that having this discussion would be helpful. And then also, when we look at the data that we have like 1 in 4 students of our, students with IEPs that are failing A or some classes. And so this is something that we want to address. And I can appreciate the rubric regarding students' effort, but in my mind, all of this looks like it's on the child or on the student. And so I'm just wondering, how do we define kind of what we're doing? And again, I'm just basing this on conversations that we've had. And if we go back to both the SIP discussion, as well as like our all building collaborations for a couple of months, we've been, saying that if we see some effort, then that then makes us just, offer more grace. And that, probably, I don't know, like out of the 8 groups, probably most of them said, gosh, we want some sort of something established. And even Mike said that. Mike said, just tell us what we're doing. And I guess that's just not my style to just say, here's what we're going to do. But if that's, honestly, if that's what you want and need, I'm happy to work with the SIP team and we just come up with what we are doing and then, bring it out to people. Because if we look at our, just look at the data, we're not providing either, whether they're accommodations in terms of what students are completing in terms of the work or an assignment, or we're not giving them a great accommodation. So there's something that we need to do, and we need to do it as a building. So this isn't me saying to all of you, like, okay, you're not doing what you need to do. I'm looking at myself saying, how do I guide our, our SIP team? What do we need to do next? And this is all a conversation so that come fall, that we're clear on it. And it might need to be a process, but if you're just not there, you don't want to have these conversations. Like I'm looking at kind of what's being said here, and I can tell there's some, either like frustration or confusion. And so, I don't want to cause that for all of you. And I don't think you want that either. So I think probably our next steps would just be going back to SIP next month. And what are our next steps? And again, we're just trying to glide toward the fall. We're not trying to implement something immediately, but I do think that, part of the value in having these conversations is, number one, an awareness that, our students on panorama data in the fall, our students with IEP said, if I fail, I try again at a greater rate than students without an IEP. And I think that's worth thinking about and looking at, like, how much resilience do we want for each individual student to have? I don't know. Do they run out of it? Do they become weary? So I think that's just something that we need to think about. Any thoughts? I mean, we're at 8:55. Would, just love to wrap this up with some sort of next step. So what do you need? And so you can go into the chat or come off on your mic and share. What are you thinking?
Heidi, this is Hannah. So I was just thinking that I'm trying to think of like how these other buildings are doing this. And I believe what they're probably doing is what you don't want to do, which I totally appreciate, which is do a top-down decision. I don't know that to be true, but I'm guessing that there are probably decisions in some of those buildings about doing no Fs, all 50% and things like that, that were a top-down decision and teachers were told to do it, and therefore that's what they're doing. And it certainly makes it easier in terms of implementation, but it doesn't necessarily make it easier in terms of buy-in. And I appreciate that you're willing to take that on as a challenge to like, can we all be a part of this decision? I think obviously the detriment to that is time, is us coming to a point where we can like have a plan and move forward with it. And I guess that my comment is more of a question than it is, a suggestion or an idea. I mean, like, we need to like start agreeing on some things to move forward. And I don't know what that is, but I did think that maybe we could take some time or invest some time, be paid for some time, or be given time during collaboration or PLCs or these Wednesday all buildings to actually look at individual students' IEPs and actually start making rubrics that are specific to the students and their accommodations that could be used in every subject area, at least with regards to these two categories, the effort and the great accommodations. Because I just think that it's so hard to look at this as a blanket when every student has different accommodations. I mean, there are some general ones, but it's so hard to wrap your mind around.
All right, well, we've got some good stuff going on in the chat. So, you know, I think a good place to start is the effort rubric seems pretty darn close to being ready. So I feel like if our SIP team just refined it at our next meeting, and then we were able to share that with our students with IEPs, that's a good start. But I do think that there is a need to reduce the number of Fs that we have. Like our percentage is almost twice of other schools. And so, you know, I'll talk with our other middle schools and find out sort of what are they doing, and then be able to help inform that and kind of go from there for sure. Thoughts?
I wouldn't worry too much. I wouldn't beat ourselves up too much about it being much higher right now. I think when you go and you look at the T2 end of trimester, you know, we're right in line with the others. Just my thoughts.
And Kelly, where are you getting that data?
I'm looking at slide 16 and 17. So you said we have twice as many. So if on slide 17, we have 26% versus 17 at Goodman and KP and 19 at Harbor Ridge versus T2. I'm guessing that's at the end of T2. So when the whole trimester is said and done, we're at 16, KP's at 17, Harbor Ridge is at 11. And so, you know, we're right in there between Harbor Ridge and KP. And so, yeah.
Something that I just a side note, something that I know of a few teachers that do who are at Harbor Ridge, because they do the 50% for all non-completed assignments, is they actually put in zeros for the whole trimester. And then the last day, right before they put in grades, they change all the zeros to 50s. And so they have this huge grade change for a bunch of their kids. So when you look at this data and we see it try to, oh, they have so many kids who have Fs now, and then all of a sudden at the end, they don't have Fs. At least some of that is because of that happening.
Yeah, and I guess I just wonder what's the toll on a student. Like we saw it when we had virtual learning 100%. So all students were at home. And then we brought in some of our special education students to come here. And I think that they, you know, we would hear from our students pretty often saying, well, why do I still have an F? I've done this and I've done that, you know? And so, and granted, it's a whole that, you know, even our, you know, like our grade level core classes kids say the same thing. They just don't understand the math of it. And so, you know, is it during the trimesters, are there ways to demonstrate the students' accommodation throughout the trimester so that maybe they stay motivated, maybe they keep, you know, like staying with their efficacy and feeling like they're having an impact on their grade by doing some kind of work. So, and definitely we are, right now we're at 9:01, and I think that you probably have things that you need to get to. I'll check with SIP team and we'll see, you know, who are we willing to continue this conversation? Do we want some kind of a top-down, you know?
I know for math, I've really tried to, at least this year, and not even so much just for SPED kids, but for a lot of kids, is leave missing assignments blank and try to grade them, especially in math, because math I can give an assessment and know exactly what they did and how they understand. Is grade what they're doing and not downgrade them for not doing. I've really, that's something I've been trying to implement. I know this year it's somewhere, I guess, in between the 0-50 rule of missing assignments. I don't know. I don't know how well it would work in other areas. I know it works in math because I can give them a math test and it'll tell me whether they understood the topics or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm seeing some chat, some really good, you know, some good comments, right? Like Kayla wanting to know, like, is our end goal to eventually implement this just kind of with all of our students? And I think that this definitely aligns with MTSS and some of the pride matrices that we've created. And probably if you took your pride matrix from your individual classrooms, you'd probably see some parallels, which is probably why the effort one, you know, made so much sense to us, because we've already done some thinking around that with our MTSS and pride matrices, I should say. And then, I see like Ashley, who's part of our SIP team, it's just a bigger conversation. And so I think we just want to come back to this. I think that we've done some really good work, and I just really appreciate everyone's thinking. And I know it's hard or it's confusing, but it's a worthy conversation to have for sure. And I've really appreciated hearing from each of you and just the different points of view. I think that's really healthy for us. So thank you. And I'm looking at Hannah's body language though, and other people's body language. Which maybe says something differently or expresses something differently. But I think today's conversation was important and healthy.
It's such a big conversation too, like Ashley and others were saying. If this is our first bite-sized chunk, is to look at students who have modified grading with IEPs and what does that look like, that starts that conversation or that work in a more manageable sense, and we can continue to expand it as needed going forward for sure. Right? Yeah, Heidi, like you said, I think that's right on. We did good work. We have something almost ready to go. Let's fine tune that and see where are we using that and then build off of it.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And Hannah, I hope that you feel better. And probably a lot of us have little residual things from our COVID vaccines. And just like every morning we wake up, we're like, oh, what's that now? So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the heck out of you. And we'll come back to this. Yes. Okay. Bye. Thank you.